The trip from Tijuana to the SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, California takes roughly 2 hours. It took Iran 5. Mehdi Taremi, the captain, one of Europe's most experienced club strikers, a man who has competed in some of the highest pressure fixtures the continent has to offer, said the trip to their own World Cup opener took 5 hours. 5 hours of travel, of security checks, of standing in lines, of waiting to be cleared and processed, for a journey of 140 miles. All of it before a single ball had been kicked. And that's before we even get to what happened after the match ended. June 15, 2026. SoFi Stadium, Inglewood, California. Iran versus New Zealand in Group G of the 2026 FIFA World Cup. And the game itself was extraordinary. New Zealand went ahead. Iran came back. New Zealand went ahead again. Iran came back again. Ramin Rezaeian scored off the side of his boot with an instinctive finish. Mohamed Mohebi headed the equalizer home in the 64th minute in front of 70,108 people, the majority of them deafeningly, emotionally, unmistakably pro-Iranian. Because Los Angeles holds the largest Iranian-American diaspora community in the world outside Iran itself. Around 230,000 people in the metro area alone, many of them or their parents having fled or left in the years following 1979. The pre-revolutionary lion and sun flags were everywhere inside that stadium, despite a FIFA ruling banning them from World Cup venues, despite an emergency legal challenge on the morning of the game trying and failing to have that ban overturned. The flags were there anyway, and when Mohebi's header hit the net, the roar was something you felt in your chest before you processed it in your head. The players, after the final whistle, didn't retreat down the tunnel. They walked the pitch. They shook hands with the New Zealanders, embraced them, swapped jerseys. And coach Amir Ghalenoei, for a quiet moment, sat alone in the dugout, not conducting, not celebrating, not organizing the next tactical session. Just sitting, absorbing something. And then the instruction came. Leave. Tonight. Get on a plane back to Tijuana. Now. Iran's team had planned to stay the night in California. This is standard professional sports management after a high-intensity match. You rest, you do your post-match protocols, your ice baths, your nutritional replenishment, you assess which players are carrying knocks, and you travel the next day when the body is in a marginally less compromised state. That was the plan. That was what the schedule communicated. Instead, within hours of the final whistle at SoFi Stadium, the Iranian squad was loaded onto a plane and flown 140 miles back south across the border. Ghalenoei walked into his post-match press conference carrying the weight of that instruction as something he had been containing for weeks and could no longer contain. "They didn't even give us time to recover," he said through an interpreter. "After the game today, they said to us, 'You have to leave immediately.' It's very important for us to have time for recovery, but we are asked to get on a plane and return to our camp in Tijuana, and we are really troubled by that." Then he said something that deserves to be heard slowly, because it is one of the most remarkable statements a head coach has ever delivered at a World Cup press conference. "We don't know why they are returning us, to be honest. I think it's very strange. It seems like others are doing the planning for us. The decision-making for us is being made elsewhere. The decision-making for us is being made elsewhere." Ghalenoei did not name the institution. He did not point to Washington or to FIFA or to any specific authority. He described the condition of not knowing, a national coaching staff at a World Cup, unable to identify which entity made the logistical call about when they had to get on a plane. And in that absence of a named decision-maker, a great deal of truth lives. Captain Taremi was equally unambiguous at his own post-match appearance. "Everything is like a disaster, actually, for us," he said. And then, in a line that should have made FIFA's senior leadership shift uncomfortably, "I think FIFA have to help us more than this." FIFA President Gianni Infantino did visit the team's locker room after the match. Taremi acknowledged it. But what Taremi said about it was more pointed than a thank you. "For sure he wants to try to help us, but it's about other things too. Everyone knows it. I don't need to mention that because you know where we are." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The context does the work. Then the next morning, a new detail surfaced that adds its own dimension to the picture. Iran forward Mehdi Taremi, an unused substitute in the New Zealand match, had been issued a single-entry U.S. visa, while the rest of his teammates had received multi-entry visas. When the squad returned to Mexico hours after the game, Tarabi's visa expired automatically. That is how a single-entry visa functions. One entry, one exit, and the document is void. He was now outside the United States with no valid authorization to re-enter for the Belgium fixture in 4 days. An intervention was needed, a new visa was eventually issued, and the situation was resolved. But the fact of it, the sheer mechanical absurdity of it, tells you everything about the conditions Iran has been navigating. The post-match departure that Iran's coach described as disruptive directly caused one of his players' visas to expire. The two facts are not separate. They are the same story. Now set against that the response from the U.S. side. Andrew Giuliani, executive director of the White House's World Cup task force, appeared on CBS News and pushed back directly. "I think that the United States has been more than fair," he said. "We've gotten visas for all 31 of the players, gotten visas for every coach, so that way there can be competitive balance. So, I would respond by saying that they're welcome for our hospitality." He also confirmed separately in reporting by ESPN that Iran had always been informed they would need to leave U.S. venues immediately after matches, the position being that Ghalenoei's characterization of a last-minute change was inaccurate, and that the immediate departure was always part of the agreed terms. That factual dispute, did the team know in advance or not, sits unresolved, with each side stating its version. But what cannot be resolved away by any factual clarification is the broader context in which the word hospitality is being applied here. Iran's training base was originally scheduled to be in Tucson, Arizona, inside the United States, like virtually every other competing nation's preparation facility. It was moved to Tijuana with FIFA's agreement, because the uncertainty over visa approvals for the delegation was severe enough that the Federation could not be confident the squad could operate from within the U.S. without disruption. The players received their visas, those crucial documents without which they cannot compete, 10 days before their opening match. 10 days. At a World Cup they qualified for, through the established, legitimate competitive process. 13 to 15 members of the broader delegation, depending on which reports you read, were denied entry entirely. Not players, not coaches, Federation officials, administrative personnel, support staff, and media. Among them, Mehdi Taj, the president of the Iran Football Federation, unable to enter the host country for a World Cup where his own national team was playing. Mehdi Taj's visa denial had a stated basis: prior affiliation with the IRGC, which the U.S. designates a terrorist organization. And Secretary of State Rubio had made public statements ahead of the tournament that anyone with such ties would not be permitted entry, regardless of their official football role. The Iran Football Federation described the cumulative effect of these denials as political interference in sport in its worst form. Welcome for our hospitality. Apply that phrase to the sum of what's been described. Hold it there. And FIFA? CNN reached out for comment on Iran's post-match departure from Los Angeles. No response came at time of reporting. On the Tarabi visa issue, there was likewise no immediate public statement. When a football governing body's president is visiting locker rooms and its communications department is producing silence, that silence is its own institutional statement. Now step back and look at what was happening inside that stadium while all of this was unfolding around it, because the contrast is the sharpest thing in this whole story. 70,108 people. The Iranian-American community of Los Angeles turned out in force, complicated and divided and opinionated as that community is. Pre- and post-revolutionary flags flew simultaneously. People with genuinely opposing views on Iran's government, who have genuinely opposing feelings about what the national team represents, who agree on essentially nothing about Tehran's political legitimacy, standing together in a stadium roaring for the same 11 players. When the Iranian anthem played, there were jeers mixed with the cheers. That crowd was not a monolith. It was a full picture of something real and messy and human. But when Rezaian's boot made contact and the first goal went in, they roared. When Mohibi's header found the net, they roared louder. And when the final whistle blew on a 2-2 draw, they were still standing, still loud, still holding whatever flag they'd chosen to bring into that building. Ghalenoei named them in his press conference. He said, "There were many Iranians here. They believe in different political affiliations, different beliefs, but they all wholeheartedly encouraged us, and I think that's a victory for all of us." A victory for all of us. He was right. Because what that crowd offered Iran's team, uncomplicated, unbureaucratized, un-visa-stamped welcome, was something that no official process in this entire tournament had managed to produce. The city said, "You belong here. We wanted to see you play." That welcome evaporated when the final whistle blew and the instruction came. The decision-making for them was being made elsewhere. Iran is not an isolated case. Iran is the most extreme version of something that has been running through this tournament like a crack through a foundation. And it needs to be said plainly. When Senegal arrived in the United States before their opening fixture, players were subjected to intensive individual security searches immediately upon disembarking from their plane. Not at an entry checkpoint, off the aircraft, directly into thorough personal searches. The images and accounts spread widely, with observers internationally calling the scenes shameful and an embarrassment to a co-host nation. Cape Verde played Spain to a 0-0 draw in one of the group stage's most surprising results. Their goalkeeper, Vozinha, made 7 saves in a stunning individual performance. At the final whistle, he broke down in tears on the pitch because his mother had been unable to obtain a U.S. visa in time to attend and missed her son's most extraordinary professional moment. Somali referee Omar Artan was denied entry to the United States entirely and turned away at Miami International Airport. A visa bond program initially required fans from 5 African nations to post deposits of up to $15,000 each merely to enter the host country for matches. Iran's own ticket allocation for their group games was revoked just days before the tournament opened, leaving fans who had already finalized travel plans with nowhere to go. Workers at SoFi Stadium, the same venue that hosted the Iran-New Zealand match, voted 96% in favor of a strike authorization in early June after working a full year without a contract. A new incident, a new affected party, a new flag. Every 48 to 72 hours, this tournament produces another version of the same story. That is not a series of administrative errors. That is a pattern. And at the center of the pattern is a question that FIFA has not publicly answered. When a host nation's immigration architecture is directly impeding the participation of qualified teams, officials, and fans, who has the obligation to intervene, and on whose authority? Football has navigated the collision between its biggest tournament and the world's hardest politics before, and it has rarely done so cleanly. The 1978 World Cup in Argentina was hosted by a military dictatorship that understood with sophisticated precision the legitimizing value of the world watching football inside its borders. The regime used the tournament. Teams competed. The trophy was lifted. The questions about what football owed the people being disappeared within miles of the stadiums were asked afterward, and they have never been satisfactorily resolved in the sport's institutional memory. In 2022, Qatar faced sustained scrutiny over the documented conditions faced by migrant workers who built the stadiums, over its criminal laws regarding same-sex relationships, over the fundamental question of whether a Gulf state with those characteristics should host football's most universal stage. FIFA's response, consistently and patiently, was that participation was better than absence, that engagement produced progress, that the tournament itself was a force for dialogue. You could accept that argument or reject it. But the structural situation, a host nation's political and legal environment creating conditions of unequal experience for some participants, was recognizable. What is different in 2026 is the scope and the directness. The United States is not restricting one category of labor or one protected characteristic. It is applying immigration and travel enforcement that affects referees who cannot enter the country, federation presidents who cannot attend their team's matches, fans who cannot afford a $15,000 bond, and, in Iran's case, a coaching staff that cannot sleep in the same city where their players just competed. And the entity that is supposed to guarantee every competing nation a fair and equal tournament experience has, so far, offered no public accounting of what it has or has not said to its co-host about any of this. Iran's next group match is against Belgium, ranked 10th in the world, a legitimate tournament contender, on Sunday back at SoFi Stadium. After that, Egypt in Seattle. Both matches present enormous obstacles for a side that has never advanced beyond the group stage in World Cup history. Here is what matters about the sporting stakes. Ghalenoei said it clearly after the New Zealand game. Many of our players, they had cramps, and that's why we had to substitute them. So it wasn't for technical reasons that we made substitutions. It was because of the injury and because of the cramp. He attributed that physical toll directly to the travel conditions surrounding the match. The 5-hour journey to reach the game, the delayed arrivals in previous days. Iran's next fixtures require recovering from that match and preparing for considerably tougher opponents, from a training base in a different country, with reduced support staff, under conditions that their coach has publicly described as compromising their competitive capacity. Football's competitive legitimacy rests on one core assumption, that the conditions of preparation and access are not materially unequal between teams. When they are, visibly, documentably, in the coach's own words at a post-match press conference, the results of the competition cannot fully tell the story of which team was better. They can only tell the story of which team won. If FIFA exits this tournament without having established, publicly and on the record, what a host nation can and cannot do to a visiting delegation, then the next World Cup host with aggressive enforcement policies has a precedent to point to. FIFA accepted it in 2026. That sentence has the potential to reshape how the sport's biggest event is governed for a generation. Think about what this actually means. Stripped of every political layer, every bilateral conflict, every flag, just the football. A head coach at a World Cup press conference says he does not know which authority gave the order that put his players on a plane hours after a professional match. He says in front of journalists from around the world, "The decision-making for us is being made elsewhere." And the institution whose sole function is to guarantee that those decisions are made fairly and transparently issues no public response. Is that what competitive football is supposed to look like? You have followed this sport long enough to know the difference between a team that faces adversity on the pitch and one that faces adversity before the bus has even reached the stadium. And the question worth sitting with is this. If this is what FIFA's guarantee of equal participation looks like in Week 1, what does it look like when the stakes of each match double, triple, and quadruple in the knockout rounds? And who exactly is the one who will eventually have to answer for it? After the final whistle at SoFi Stadium, while his players were walking the pitch, embracing New Zealanders, raising their jerseys, absorbing the noise of 70,000 people who drove from across the vast spread of Los Angeles to be inside that building for that moment, Coach Amir Ghalenoei sat alone in the dugout, not organizing, not celebrating, not instructing, just sitting, in the sound of it all, in the lights of the stadium, in a quiet that nobody was filming because every camera was pointed elsewhere. And then the instruction came, and the plane was waiting, and the 140-mile journey back across the border began. By the next morning, one of his unused substitutes needed a new visa just to re-enter the country for the next match, because the post-match departure had voided it. Between that dugout moment and the tarmac at Tijuana, in the hours after a crowd of 70,000 refused to stop cheering for a team competing in a country at war with their nation, a coaching staff had to board a plane without knowing who had ordered them onto it. The World Cup 2026 has barely begun. The questions are only getting louder, and someone, eventually, is going to have to start providing real answers. If this story hit different for you, drop your take in the comments. I want to know where you stand on this. Like the video if you think FIFA's silence needs to end. And subscribe because we are not done pulling on this thread. Every time this tournament tries to move forward, another chapter opens, and we'll be here for every single one of them.